He was just the janitor everyone mocked, until his words shattered their assumptions and changed the boardroom forever. Marcus Green, a janitor at Titan Tech Corp, quietly sweeps the floors each day. He keeps his head down, listening to music, and never bothers anyone. One morning, during a board meeting, CEO Richard Voss spots Marcus carrying cleaning supplies and mocks him in front of executives. "You must be really proud of sweeping floors, huh? Stupid little man." The board laughs nervously, and Marcus simply nods, hiding a flicker of hurt and anger. But he doesn't react. He knows that appearances can be deceiving. Later that afternoon, the office hummed with the usual controlled chaos, the clatter of keyboards and low murmur of conversations filling the sleek, glass-walled workspace. But a particular tension lingered near the executive conference room, where a group of senior executives huddled around a polished mahogany table, papers spread before them, screens glowing with email threads and financial projections. Marcus, usually immersed in his own quiet corner of the office, paused as he overheard snippets of conversation drifting from the room. "We need a clean presentation for the international partners. No errors this time," one executive muttered, his voice tinged with stress. Another added, "If they notice even the slightest discrepancy, it could jeopardize the whole negotiation. We can't afford mistakes at this stage." Marcus, curious and slightly amused, leaned against the wall just outside the conference room, watching as Richard, the ever-impatient operations director, ran a frantic hand through his hair, muttering about margins, deadlines, and currency conversion errors. On instinct, Marcus glanced at the spreadsheets and presentation materials scattered across the table, his eyes catching a subtle but critical error in the figures concerning the European market projections. Without thinking twice, he walked over, casually pointing out the misalignment in the calculations and suggesting a small but precise correction that would align the projections with the actual contract stipulations. Richard looked up sharply, skepticism etched across his face. "Wait, you're saying this is wrong?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and irritation, assuming it was nothing more than luck. Marcus nodded calmly, explaining exactly why the numbers didn't add up, tracing each step methodically with a clarity that made even the most seasoned financial analysts pause. The executives exchanged glances, whispering among themselves, their brows furrowed as they checked his correction against the original documents. A sudden alert blinked on one of the monitors, indicating an unexpected video call from a high-profile international partner, and the room erupted into hurried preparations. Phones buzzed, laptops clicked frantically, and Richard, slightly flustered, motioned Marcus toward the center of the room. "All right, let's see if you really know what you're talking about," he muttered, his tone skeptical but tinged with curiosity. Marcus stepped forward, exuding a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the frenzy surrounding him. As the video call connected, a wave of multilingual chatter filled the screen, partners speaking in French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Japanese, Russian, Italian, and Hindi, each switching effortlessly, discussing contract clauses, timelines, and cultural considerations that could affect the negotiations. The executives froze, struggling to maintain coherence and clarity, their attempts to respond often met with blank stares or requests for clarification. Marcus, seemingly unfazed, leaned slightly toward the microphone and without hesitation began responding fluently, first in French, then seamlessly switching to Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Japanese, Russian, Italian, and finally Hindi, his pronunciation precise, his tone professional and diplomatic, perfectly capturing the nuances of each language. Each executive in the room felt the air shift around them as they watched their colleagues on the screen nod in approval, visibly impressed, occasionally exchanging quick smiles of astonishment. The CEO, who had been seated at the head of the table with a confident, almost smug smile, suddenly stiffened, his expression frozen in disbelief as Marcus continued, navigating complex contract discussions, answering nuanced questions, and offering culturally informed suggestions that elevated the entire negotiation. Marcus's calm demeanor and extraordinary linguistic ability transformed the room from chaos to awe, leaving the executives scrambling to keep pace and adjust their own contributions to match his clarity. As the conversation progressed, he subtly wove in strategic insights, correcting minor misinterpretations in real time, translating idiomatic expressions where necessary and providing context that bridged the cultural and business divide, all while maintaining an air of quiet authority. Even Richard, initially skeptical and slightly annoyed by Marcus's sudden intrusion, found himself leaning in, captivated by the ease with which Marcus handled the conversation, aware that every word, every turn of phrase, carried not just meaning but persuasion, leaving an unmistakable impression on the international partners. The room was completely silent, the only sounds coming from the occasional clicking of a laptop or the low hum of the conference call, as all eyes remained fixed on Marcus, who spoke with a natural grace and confidence that no one had anticipated. The CEO's earlier smugness had vanished entirely, replaced by a mixture of shock, admiration, and something that bordered on fear, as if realizing that the young employee they had all underestimated was suddenly indispensable, capable of navigating situations none of them could manage alone. Marcus concluded the call with a perfectly timed summary, reiterating key agreements in English while seamlessly referencing each partner's original statements in their native languages, ensuring that nothing was lost in translation, that every subtlety of tone and meaning had been preserved. The partners on the other end nodded, some smiling warmly, others exchanging appreciative glances, clearly impressed and reassured by the professionalism and expertise that Marcus had brought to the negotiation. As the call ended and the screen went dark, the room remained in stunned silence, executives exchanging quiet, incredulous murmurs, unsure whether to applaud, thank him, or simply process what had just occurred. Marcus, ever composed, simply returned to his seat as if nothing extraordinary had happened, folding his hands neatly on the table, watching the ripple effects of his intervention unfold. Richard, who had been skeptical moments before, now leaned back, his jaw slightly slack, muttering under his breath, I had no idea." The CEO, still frozen, finally blinked, attempting to regain composure, but the previous aura of authority and confidence was irrevocably altered. In that moment, Marcus had revealed not just a talent, but a formidable presence, an intellect and skill set that no one had truly anticipated, capable of turning potential disaster into triumph, bridging cultures and languages with ease, and commanding attention without raising his voice. It was a revelation that left everyone in the room reconsidering everything they thought they knew about him. And in that moment, the dynamic of the office, the hierarchy, and the perception of talent had shifted forever, the hidden abilities of a quiet observer now impossible to ignore. The office had returned to its usual hum of activity after the extraordinary events in the conference room, yet an unusual tension lingered, a kind of charged awareness that something fundamental had shifted, and no one felt quite the same. Marcus, calm and composed as ever, had retreated to his workspace, quietly reviewing his emails, organizing files, and making notes on upcoming projects, his movements measured and deliberate, as if nothing remarkable had just occurred, even though the entire executive floor had witnessed a performance that defied expectation. Richard lingered nearby, packing in small circles, his mind racing through what he had just seen and heard, replaying Marcus's flawless multilingual negotiation, the subtle corrections, the graceful diplomacy that had impressed even the most demanding international partners. He had been skeptical, he realized, not just about Marcus's abilities, but about him as a person, allowing preconceived notions, assumptions, and biases to cloud his judgment. He stopped mid-step, taking a deep breath, then walked purposefully toward Marcus, who looked up calmly, acknowledging him with a faint nod, a quiet readiness to engage but no hint of impatience or arrogance. "Marcus," Richard began, his voice unusually hesitant, carrying a mixture of awe and a hint of guilt. I had no idea." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, his expression neutral, allowing Richard the space to continue. "Why haven't you told anyone about this, any of it?" He asked, the words tumbling out in a rush, almost apologetic in their tone, as if he feared that the answer would be a rebuke, a challenge, or worse, a confirmation of his own failure to recognize talent. Marcus smiled faintly, a subtle knowing curve of his lips that conveyed neither pride nor condescension, only a quiet dignity. "I prefer working quietly, sir," he said, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying a resonance that seemed to command attention without effort. Languages are tools, not badges. Knowledge is useful, not something to display for admiration. Richard nodded slowly, the weight of Marcus's words settling heavily upon him. It was not just the humility or the discipline, it was the clarity of purpose, the understanding that skill was to be wielded for effect and excellence, not for recognition or personal gain. As he looked at Marcus, Richard felt a wave of realization crash over him, sharp and unsettling. He had judged Marcus based on surface-level assumptions, job title, demeanor, even skin color, and he had overlooked the depth, the intelligence, and the extraordinary capability that had been present all along. He had assumed that Marcus, quiet and unobtrusive, was unremarkable, just another competent employee among many, never suspecting that beneath that calm exterior lay a mind capable of navigating complex negotiations, mastering multiple languages, and thinking with strategic precision. The recognition was almost painful in its clarity, a bitter taste of guilt mixed with admiration, as Richard realized the extent of his own bias, the narrowness of his perspective, and the limitations of his own experience and judgment. He had not just misjudged Marcus's abilities, he had underestimated his humanity, failing to see him as a person with dreams, discipline, and talents that demanded respect and acknowledgement. The office around them seemed to fade slightly in Richard's perception, the hum of keyboards and muted conversations dimming against the magnitude of his awakening awareness. He was acutely aware of the subtle dynamics of power and perception in the workplace, the way assumptions could obscure truth, the way casual judgments could blind even experienced professionals to extraordinary talent. Richard continued, his voice quieter now, almost introspective. I thought I understood my team. But clearly I was wrong. You've been underestimated, not just by me but by all of us, and I see now how unfair that was. Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the sincerity in Richard's tone. Recognition is often less important than results, he replied, his voice steady. The work speaks for itself when the time is right. That's all that matters. Richard felt a pang of respect, tempered with self-reproach. He realized he had spent years evaluating people based on superficial metrics, titles, or appearances, rather than on true ability and character. In that instant, he made a silent promise to himself, to change, to listen more, to observe more carefully, and to challenge his own biases before forming judgments. The CEO, who had been observing the interaction from across the room, now approached, his expression a mixture of astonishment and contemplation. He had witnessed the entire conference call, the flawless execution of Marcus's skills, and the subsequent private acknowledgement between Marcus and Richard. For the first time, he saw Marcus not merely as an employee or a cog in the corporate machine, but as an individual of extraordinary capability, a person whose potential far exceeded the narrow categories the company had previously applied. Marcus, the CEO said, his voice measured, carrying both authority and newfound respect, what you demonstrated today, it's rare. Remarkable. I admit I did not fully understand your talents until now, and I regret that our perception of your role limited how we valued you. Marcus inclined his head slightly, listening with patience, his composure unshaken, the faintest smile still on his lips, not for approval, but for the clarity of shared understanding. The CEO continued, I believe this company has been blind to potential for far too long. Your abilities, they deserve to be recognized, nurtured, and leveraged, not hidden. You've reminded me that leadership must be willing to see the whole person, not just the label or the title. The room felt heavier, charged with the intensity of this acknowledgement. Richard, now standing beside the CEO, felt a profound shift within himself, an almost humbling awareness that his prior assessments had been limited, incomplete, and unjust. He understood, finally, that Marcus's calm confidence and silent diligence were not signs of deficiency or reserve, but of strength, foresight, and intelligence that could transform the company if allowed to flourish. Marcus's gaze swept over the room, noting the subtle changes in demeanor, the softened posture of executives who had once regarded him with mild indifference, the contemplative expressions of colleagues who were reconsidering assumptions, and the quiet respect forming in Richard's eyes. It was a moment of revelation, not just for Marcus, but for the entire leadership structure, a moment where perception, bias, and reality collided, forcing a re-evaluation of what it meant to recognize talent, to lead fairly, and to acknowledge the richness of human capability beyond conventional metrics. As he returned to his seat, Richard spoke once more, quietly, almost reverently. "Marcus, I see you now, not just for what you can do, but for who you are. And I promise, from this day forward, that perception will not limit opportunity again." Marcus offered only a faint, serene nod, understanding that change would come gradually, but satisfied that a seed had been planted. The CEO, Richard, and the entire executive team would never view him the same way again. The recognition of Marcus's extraordinary abilities was not just a personal triumph. It was a reflection of the slow but essential evolution of the company's understanding of talent, equity, and respect. In that moment, Marcus's quiet presence radiated power, not through dominance, but through competence, dignity, and the undeniable truth of his skills, leaving an indelible impression that would reshape perceptions, influence decisions, and quietly, irreversibly, alter the trajectory of his career and the culture of the workplace forever. The office continued its rhythm, yet nothing was ordinary anymore. Every glance, every interaction, every assessment of talent would now carry the awareness that brilliance often resides quietly, waiting for the moment to reveal itself, and that recognition, when delayed, must be accompanied by respect, humility, and an honest re-evaluation of assumptions long held too rigidly. Marcus's hidden abilities had surfaced not for acclaim, but for clarity, and in doing so, he had changed not only the minds of those around him, but the very fabric of understanding within the leadership of the company, leaving behind a quiet but powerful legacy that would shape the organization for years to come. The hum of the office felt different the next morning, charged with anticipation and the subtle awareness that yesterday's events had shifted the balance of power and perception. Marcus arrived at his usual desk, organized and minimalist, the faint scent of polished wood from the executive conference room lingering in the air, yet he felt a sense of calm resolve. He had always preferred to move quietly, letting his work speak for itself, but the extraordinary display of his abilities during the negotiation had made it impossible to remain unnoticed, and he knew that attention, whether desired or not, would inevitably bring opportunities and challenges. Richard, normally brisk and businesslike, approached Marcus with an unusual hesitancy, his stride less confident than usual, as if he were carefully weighing every word before speaking. "Marcus," he began, stopping just short of the desk, "I've been thinking about yesterday and about what you brought to that negotiation. It wasn't just skill, it was vision, foresight, and leadership. You've handled yourself in a way none of us expected, and I realized, well, we all realized, that Titan Tech has been overlooking potential in ways we can no longer ignore." Marcus tilted his head slightly, observing Richard with his usual quiet composure, aware that the man standing before him was wrestling with a complex mix of respect, guilt, and ambition. Richard continued, his voice deliberate, "I want to offer you a position on Titan Tech's global relations team. With your skills in languages, diplomacy, and cultural insight, you could shape our international presence in ways that no one else can." Marcus's gaze remained steady, thoughtful, yet a flicker of hesitation passed through his expression, betraying the storm of past experiences that shadowed his mind. He remembered the ridicule, the subtle dismissals, and the prejudice he had endured throughout his career, assumptions based on his quiet demeanor, his unassuming appearance, and yes, the bias that had clouded judgment in rooms like this one for far too long. The memory made him pause, a cold reminder of the cost of visibility in a world that often celebrated conformity over authenticity. He allowed a measured silence to settle between them, letting Richard's words hang in the air while he considered the implications, the opportunity, and the responsibility that came with stepping into such a visible role. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and measured, carrying the weight of experience and moral conviction. "I will accept the position," he said, and Richard's eyes lit with anticipation, but under one condition, that Titan Tech commits to running meaningful diversity and inclusion programs that prevent the prejudices I have faced from continuing, that ensure opportunity is accessible to all, regardless of background, appearance, or assumptions others may make. Richard blinked, taken aback by the firmness of Marcus's requirement, the clarity and ethical weight behind it. "Diversity and inclusion?" he asked slowly, as if testing the water, trying to reconcile the moral principle with the practical considerations of corporate operations, budgets, and profit margins. Marcus nodded, unwavering, his gaze meeting Richard's steadily. Yes, without this, any work I do here risks being overshadowed by the very biases that have hindered progress and harmed talented individuals for far too long. True success cannot be measured by contracts won or profits made alone. It must include respect, fairness, and the opportunity for everyone to contribute. Richard felt a deep, uneasy humility settle within him, a realization that leadership, authority, and influence carried responsibilities beyond financial metrics, beyond quarterly reports, and beyond personal ambition. The weight of Marcus's words forced him to confront his own complicity in systemic bias, the small but pervasive ways Titan Tech had failed to recognize talent, and the ways his assumptions had limited opportunity for others. The silence stretched, a moment of reflection in which both men assessed the stakes, the potential, and the ethical imperative Marcus had articulated. Slowly, Richard nodded, a subtle but resolute gesture of agreement. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter than usual, imbued with respect and acknowledgement. "We will implement these programs. We'll ensure Titan Tech fosters an environment where merit, skill, and character define opportunity, not superficial assessments or bias. I promise this, and I will personally oversee it to ensure it happens." Marcus allowed a small, approving smile to form, one that carried satisfaction without arrogance, acknowledgement without triumphalism. "Then I will join the team," he said, his tone definitive yet calm, signaling the beginning of a partnership built not just on skill, but on principle. Richard extended his hand, and Marcus shook it firmly, the gesture symbolic not just of acceptance, but of trust, respect, and mutual commitment to a higher standard of integrity within the organization. The conversation left a tangible change in the atmosphere. Colleagues passing by noticed a subtle shift in demeanor between Marcus and Richard, a quiet acknowledgement that the office hierarchy, while intact, had transformed. Where skepticism had once lingered, there was now a mixture of respect, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Marcus's decision sent ripples beyond his immediate sphere. It became a quiet signal to the organization that ethical standards, inclusion, and moral courage mattered as much as results, revenue, or recognition. He began to receive tentative inquiries from colleagues curious about his role, his perspective, and the principles he stood by. Each interaction was an opportunity to model professionalism, dignity, and integrity, subtly influencing the culture without confrontation or spectacle. In the weeks that followed, the diversity and inclusion initiatives Marcus had insisted upon began to take shape. Training programs, mentorship opportunities, and structured pathways for advancement were implemented, creating a visible shift in awareness and accountability. Marcus's presence on the global relations team allowed him to apply his linguistic talents and diplomatic insight directly to strategic initiatives, while also serving as a living example of how equitable practices could reveal hidden talent, inspire excellence, and enrich the company's culture. Richard, observing the transformation, learned firsthand that humility, ethics, and respect were not just abstract values. They were strategic assets, enhancing collaboration, fostering loyalty, and generating results that were both sustainable and principled. Titan Tech began to approach international negotiations and internal governance with a new sense of awareness, guided by Marcus's expertise and ethical framework. He demonstrated that real impact required more than intelligence. It demanded courage, vision, and the willingness to challenge assumptions, both personal and institutional. As Marcus settled into his new role, he remained quietly observant, his focus unwavering, his demeanor calm, yet every action carried influence. The office had changed, subtly but irrevocably, under the combined weight of talent and principle, and Marcus's decision to accept the proposition on ethical grounds ensured that the transformation was more than transactional. It was cultural, moral, and enduring. The lessons learned by Richard and the leadership team were profound. Brilliance unrecognized is wasted potential, and ethical leadership is inseparable from effective strategy. Marcus had turned an opportunity into a catalyst for systemic change, proving that the most valuable negotiations are sometimes those that occur not across continents, but within the hearts and minds of those entrusted with power. And so, with a steady resolve and quiet dignity, Marcus began the next chapter of his career, one in which impact, principle, and talent converged to create results far beyond the ordinary, and where the office, once a space of overlooked potential, became a landscape of recognition, opportunity, and ethical accountability, forever changed by one individual's insistence that fairness and skill must walk hand in hand, and that leadership is measured not only in profits, but in respect, inclusion, and the courage to do what is right, even when it challenges tradition, assumption, and the comfort of those in power. In the months that followed Marcus's acceptance of the global relations role, Titantech began to transform in ways that no one could have anticipated, and Marcus himself became a quiet but unstoppable force driving change and innovation across the company. He thrived in his new position, traveling across continents, negotiating high-stakes contracts with multinational clients in their native languages, and bridging cultural gaps with an ease that left even the most seasoned executives in awe. From Paris to Shanghai, Dubai to Sao Paulo, Tokyo to Mumbai, Marcus moved through conference rooms and boardrooms with a calm authority that commanded attention without arrogance. Each conversation, each presentation, and each negotiation became an opportunity to demonstrate the power of understanding, empathy, and precision, as he effortlessly switched between French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Japanese, Russian, Italian, and Hindi, ensuring that no subtlety was lost in translation, that no cultural nuance went unnoticed. But while his linguistic brilliance drew immediate recognition, Marcus's impact extended far beyond mere communication. Internally, Titantech began to feel the ripple effects of his presence. The diversity and inclusion programs he had insisted upon were implemented across departments, fostering an environment where employees from all backgrounds, experiences, and disciplines were encouraged to showcase hidden talents. Previously overlooked individuals began stepping forward, sharing ideas, innovations, and skills that had been stifled by outdated hierarchies and biased assumptions. The office became a place where creativity, intelligence, and diligence were recognized and celebrated regardless of rank, title, or background. Marcus's own approach to leadership, quiet, methodical, and principled, set a new standard for professional excellence. He never demanded attention or recognition, yet his work spoke volumes, inspiring colleagues to embrace both competence and humility. Employees who had once hesitated to voice their ideas now felt empowered, knowing that merit would be acknowledged, not dismissed. Titantech's culture shifted from cautious compliance to confident collaboration, and the company's leadership observed a tangible change in morale, productivity, and engagement. Financially, the results were undeniable. The contracts Marcus negotiated, strengthened by his ability to connect across languages and cultures, led to record-breaking profits for Titantech. Clients repeatedly expressed appreciation for the clarity, precision, and respect Marcus brought to every interaction, and his reputation quickly spread beyond the company, solidifying Titantech's presence as a truly global enterprise with an authentic understanding of international markets. Yet, Marcus's true legacy was not just in profits or accolades, it was in the cultural barriers he broke and the assumptions he dismantled. He became a symbol of intelligence, perseverance, and ethical leadership, demonstrating that extraordinary talent could exist in unexpected forms and that recognizing it could change the trajectory of an entire organization. Richard, in particular, underwent a profound personal transformation. Humbled by his earlier misjudgments and inspired by Marcus's unwavering commitment to principle and excellence, he began to actively educate himself about diversity, equity, and inclusion. He attended DEI seminars, read extensively on the subject, and sought out conversations with employees whose experiences had been marginalized in the past. The process was humbling, at times uncomfortable, but ultimately enlightening. Richard realized that leadership required more than strategy and financial acumen. It required empathy, self-awareness, and the courage to challenge one's own biases. He started mentoring colleagues on inclusive leadership practices, ensuring that Titantech's policies were not only performative but meaningful, embedding fairness and opportunity into the corporate DNA. Across the company, employees noticed the shift. Meetings became spaces of collaboration rather than hierarchy. Brainstorming sessions became inclusive and dynamic, and innovation surged as voices previously silenced were encouraged and amplified. Marcus's presence served as a constant reminder that hidden talents were everywhere, waiting for the right environment to flourish, and that recognizing them was not just an ethical imperative, but a strategic advantage. Conferences and seminars began inviting Marcus to speak, not only about negotiation and global relations, but also about the importance of ethical leadership, equity, and the value of fostering inclusive workplaces. His reputation as a bridge between cultures and as a catalyst for positive change grew, inspiring organizations far beyond Titan Tech to re-examine their own practices and the assumptions they had long held. Internally, Marcus remained modest, never claiming credit, instead focusing on mentoring and uplifting others. Employees who had once felt invisible now had role models, opportunities, and a renewed sense of purpose. Titan Tech's internal innovation programs flourished as teams realized that collaboration, diversity, and trust were far more valuable than rigid hierarchies or superficial metrics. Richard often watched Marcus in meetings and presentations, recognizing that he had underestimated the quiet, thoughtful man who had transformed not only international negotiations, but also the very culture of the company. He felt gratitude and humility, understanding that Marcus's influence had forever altered the way leadership operated, and that ethical courage could amplify results in ways traditional metrics never could. Marcus, in his characteristic manner, continued to lead with quiet confidence, his brilliance a constant yet understated force, shaping Titan Tech into a company that did not merely succeed in global markets, but thrived by honoring integrity, intelligence, and inclusivity. Every negotiation he led, every initiative he championed, and every employee he inspired served as a testament to the transformative power of recognition, respect, and opportunity. By breaking barriers, both visible and invisible, Marcus proved that true leadership transcends titles and accolades, and that the courage to embrace diversity, challenge bias, and elevate hidden talent can create a legacy far more enduring than profits alone. Titan Tech was no longer just a corporation. It had become a landscape of possibility, a place where innovation was nurtured, talent was celebrated, and individuals like Marcus could turn their extraordinary gifts into catalysts for global impact and organizational excellence. And through it all, Marcus remained ever composed, a quiet symbol of the power of perseverance, intelligence, and ethical action, reminding everyone that brilliance often emerges from the most unassuming corners, and that those who dare to challenge assumptions, advocate for inclusion, and act with integrity can change the world, one barrier at a time. Months had passed since the events that had transformed not only Marcus's career, but the entire culture of Titan Tech, and Richard found himself reflecting on that fateful morning when he had called Marcus stupid, a moment that now seemed almost surreal in its contrast to the man who had since redefined what it meant to lead, to influence, and to inspire. Richard sat alone in his office, staring out over the city skyline, the hum of the office below a distant undertone to the thoughts that weighed heavily on him. He remembered the casual dismissal, the snide remark, the assumption that intelligence and capability could be measured by outward demeanor or by rank within a corporate hierarchy. That memory, once a trivial echo, now carried a sharp sting of guilt, but also a profound lesson about perception, humility, and the hidden depths that people often possess, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Marcus, in stark contrast, had risen to the forefront of Titan Tech's global operations with a quiet authority that commanded respect without ever needing to assert it overtly. He was no longer overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Executives who had once exchanged knowing smirks now deferred to him in meetings, acknowledging his insights with attentive nods, and international clients sought his guidance explicitly, knowing that his fluency, cultural intelligence, and strategic insight could turn potential conflicts into partnerships, misunderstandings into agreements, and risks into opportunities. Yet Marcus's ascent was not marked by arrogance or gloating. He did not wield his newfound respect as a weapon, nor did he relish in the discomfort of those who had once mocked him. Instead, he embraced a role that combined influence with mentorship, recognizing that the true measure of power was not the admiration of peers or the size of one's contracts, but the ability to elevate others and to shape an environment where talent could flourish unimpeded by bias or prejudice. He devoted time to young employees, guiding them quietly but decisively, teaching them not only technical skills, but the value of patience, humility, and diligence. Marcus emphasized the importance of observation, of understanding context before acting, and of using one's abilities not as badges of superiority, but as tools to create tangible, positive impact. He instilled in his mentees a sense of ethical responsibility alongside professional competence, showing that intelligence and character were inseparable in creating meaningful success. Richard, now intimately aware of the consequences of his earlier assumptions, found himself transformed as well. He had attended DEI seminars, engaged in uncomfortable but necessary conversations with employees, and reevaluated not only how he assessed others, but also how he defined leadership, intelligence, and potential. His earlier pride had been tempered by the humility Marcus's example inspired, and he now approached decision-making, recruitment, and mentoring with a heightened awareness of how bias, however subtle, could shape outcomes, limit opportunity, and undermine the collective potential of the organization. Richard often observed Marcus in meetings, presentations, and negotiations, marveling at the seamless way he commanded attention, navigated complex dynamics, and influenced outcomes without ever needing to dominate conversations. Every word Marcus spoke was measured, every action purposeful, yet there was a softness to his authority, a generosity of spirit that amplified his influence while simultaneously making those around him feel valued, heard, and respected. The employees who had once whispered doubts about Marcus now looked to him as a standard of excellence and ethical leadership. Internally, Titan Tech had become a vastly different place. Hierarchies had softened, and collaboration flourished in ways previously unimaginable. The culture had shifted from one of cautious compliance and subtle competition to one of empowerment, creativity, and mutual respect. Individuals who had hidden their talents, fearing ridicule or dismissal, now felt safe to contribute, and the organization began to reap the rewards of diverse perspectives, innovative ideas, and untapped expertise. Marcus's quiet insistence on equity and inclusion had become institutionalized, creating pathways for employees at all levels to be recognized and to thrive. He addressed bias with subtle firmness, correcting misconceptions without confrontation, advocating for fairness while maintaining the dignity of all parties involved. His influence extended beyond policy. It permeated the daily interactions, the tone of meetings, and the culture of recognition that now defined Titan Tech. For Richard, the journey from mockery to respect was both professional and deeply personal. He recognized the profound error of judging potential through narrow, superficial criteria, and he now understood that wisdom, talent, and leadership could emerge from the most unassuming individuals. Every time someone underestimated Marcus, whether intentionally or unconsciously, it served as a reminder that assumptions could be deceiving, and that the mind, sharp, disciplined, and ethically guided, was far more powerful than a title, a credential, or a reputation built on appearances. Richard found himself sharing these lessons with other executives, embedding Marcus's example into leadership training, strategic planning, and corporate philosophy. He spoke candidly about the morning he had misjudged Marcus, using the story to illustrate the dangers of bias, the value of humility, and the transformative potential of recognizing hidden talent. Marcus himself remained steadfastly composed, never dwelling on past ridicule, never seeking vengeance or validation. His focus was always forward, always on the work, the people, and the impact he could make. His demeanor became emblematic of perseverance and intelligence married with ethical purpose, a silent but powerful testament to the idea that excellence need not be loud to be seen, and that respect earned through merit, fairness, and quiet determination was far more enduring than any fleeting acknowledgement based on superficial assessment. Across Titan Tech, employees began to internalize these lessons, fostering a culture where recognition was grounded in achievement, effort, and integrity, and where bias, whenever detected, was addressed with both firmness and empathy. Marcus became a mentor, a symbol, and an exemplar, showing that intelligence, skill, and ethical action were intertwined, and that personal resilience, combined with principle, could not only overcome mockery but reshape the entire organization. Richard, humbled and enlightened, continued to learn, to reflect, and to implement the insights Marcus had revealed, ensuring that Titan Tech remained not only a global leader in business, but also a beacon of inclusive, ethical, and principled leadership. In quiet moments, Marcus would observe the office, seeing young employees presenting innovative ideas, international partners nodding in approval, and colleagues collaborating without fear of judgment, and he would smile faintly, knowing that every barrier broken, every stereotype challenged, and every assumption overturned was a victory not just for him, but for the countless others who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. And so, the narrative of mockery transformed into one of respect, perseverance, and enduring influence, proving that brilliance often resides quietly, patiently, and persistently, waiting for the opportunity to emerge, and that the power of the mind, when coupled with integrity and dedication, could reshape perceptions, inspire generations, and leave an indelible mark on both people and organizations, forever reminding everyone that true respect is earned through action, wisdom, and the quiet strength to rise above assumptions, prejudice, and underestimation.